This is Blood Message, a brand new AAA game from the studio behind Naraka Blade Point, set in 848 AD, where a father and his son have to cross 1,000 miles of desert to deliver a message that could save their homeland. But it's not the reason you should be paying attention, it's a symptom. 2 years ago, a Chinese studio released Black Myth Wukong and made $961 million, with more than 75% of it coming from China alone. That number broke something. Blood Message is what happens next. This is Silver's Edge, and today we're talking about Blood Message and the bigger story it's part of. What is Blood Message? Let's start with the game itself because the premise is genuinely unlike anything AAA gaming has tried before. Blood Message is NetEase game's first AAA single-player title, blending brutal survival combat with profound instant storytelling. It's being developed by 24 Entertainment, the studio behind Naraka Blade Point, under NetEase's Thunderfire division. The game is set in the late Tang Dynasty in 848 AD. You play as a nameless messenger who, along with his son, must cross roughly 1,000 miles of desolate desert and hostile wilderness to deliver a message that could determine the fate of his homeland. But here's what makes this genuinely different from almost every AAA game you have played. The story is based on real historical events. Jiang Yichao led an uprising against Tibetan forces that reclaimed Chinese territory, and afterwards dispatched 10 groups of messengers, mostly ordinary common people, across vast and hostile territory to relay news of the victory to the Tang capital. Blood Message adapts this actual historical episode. The development team has been explicit about their intention. The game invites players to step into the shoes of unsung heroes, not emperors or generals, but ordinary people driven by extraordinary resolve. Sit with that for a second. This is a AAA game built with Unreal Engine 5, full cinematic production, and its main character isn't a chosen one, isn't a god, isn't a legendary warrior, he is a courier. A father trying to protect his son while doing his job in the middle of a collapsing world. The world has heard too many stories of emperors as generals. Blood Message is an ode to the unsung heroes. And that sentence alone tells you something important about where this game is coming from creatively. And we'll come back to it in a bit, but for now, what genre does this game belong to? Polygon describes it as being in the vein of Uncharted and Assassin's Creed, third person, cinematic, narrative driven, blending exploration, stealth, and survival combat. Reportedly, many core team members come from major international AAA studios with extensive experience in developing large-scale single-player games. This isn't a passion project from a small indie team. This is a studio with serious resources making a deliberate, confident bet on telling a specifically, unapologetically Chinese historical story at a AAA production level for a global audience. Chapter 2: The Game That Changed Everything. To understand why Blood Message matters, you have to understand what happened 2 years before it. In August 2024, a Chinese studio called Game Science released a game based on Journey to the West, one of the most famous stories in Chinese literature. It was called Black Myth Wukong, and it sold 20 million copies on Steam alone, generating over $961 million in revenue, setting a new benchmark for China's domestic AAA game sales. To put that in perspective, Wukong outsold Spider-Man, Hogwarts Legacy, and Zelda several times over in China alone. And even outside of China, it outstrips games like Alan Wake 2. But here's the number that matters most for understanding what we're about to discuss. At least 75% of copies sold are believed to be from within China, whereas Western single-player titles will typically see only single-digit sales in the Chinese market. Read that again. Wukong did not succeed by being a watered-down, globally homogenized product designed to appeal equally to everyone everywhere. It succeeded by being deeply, specifically, unapologetically Chinese, and the global audience came to it anyway. Wukong is widely considered the first hit AAA game from China, with one outlet calling it Chinese K-pop moment. That comparison to K-pop is not an accident, and it's worth sitting with. K-pop didn't conquer the world by westernizing itself into blandness. It conquered the world by being specifically, confidently Korean, and trusting that specificity itself would be the appeal. Wukong's commercial success signified a shift, proving that China could now produce top-tier artistic AAA games, something that had traditionally been dominated almost exclusively by studios in Europe, the US, and Japan. And the industry noticed immediately. Local publishers in China revised their attitudes towards high-budget single-player titles since Wukong's debut, and numerous companies began offering significant investment towards similar ambitious projects. Blood Message is a direct descendant of that moment. It would not exist, or at least not with this scale of ambition and confidence, without Wukong proving the model works. Chapter 3: Why this is bigger than one studio. Here's where I want to zoom out, because this isn't really a story about two games. It's a story about a structural shift in who gets to make the biggest, most expensive, most culturally visible form of entertainment on the planet. And for the entire history of AAA gaming, the answer to who makes the blockbusters has been remarkably narrow. American studios, Western European studios, Japanese studios. That triangle has held for 40 years. The rise of regionally rooted AAA video games has been slower than a film due to high production costs and the rate of technological change. But this transition was always inevitable, and it's being accelerated by the growing capability and accessibility of engines like Unreal and Unity, the affordability of asset libraries, and now generative AI tools. In other words, the technical barrier to entry for making a game that looks and feels like a Western AAA blockbuster has collapsed. The thing that used to be exclusive to a handful of studios in Santa Monica, Tokyo, and Warsaw is now generally accessible to a much wider range of developers around the world. But what's changing isn't just the technological gap, it's the confidence gap. Studios outside the traditional AAA triangle are realizing that they don't need to imitate Western Japanese storytelling conventions to compete. They can tell their own stories rooted in their own history and culture at the same production quality, and a global audience will show up anyway. Black with Wukong's success has triggered a new era of competition within Chinese gaming industry specifically, with major studios scrambling to figure out their own strategy in response. And this is the part that should genuinely excite anyone who cares about games as a creative medium. For decades, AAA gaming has recycled the same cultural touchstones because that's where the AAA infrastructure happened to be built. That's not a creative choice, it's an accident of industrial history. And that accident is now being corrected. And Blood Message, built around an obscure but genuinely moving piece of Tang Dynasty that most players, including most Chinese players, had probably never heard of before this announcement, is a direct product of that correction. Chapter 4, The Unsung Hero. I want to come back to something I mentioned earlier because I think it's actually the most interesting design decision in this entire conversation. Blood Message's developers explicitly frame their game as being about ordinary people, not emperors or generals. Their own words were, and I quote, "How can countless ordinary people, smaller than dust, leave a mark on history?" Their answer is that the remembrance and praise of future generations becomes their eternal monument. Compare that framing to almost every Western AAA protagonist of the last decade. You are the last of your kind. You are the chosen one. You are the one prophecy spoke of. Even when these games gesture toward humility, the player character is almost always exceptional by design, gifted with power, skills, or destiny that set them apart from everyone else in the world. But Blood Message is doing something different on purpose. The real messengers, Jiang Yi Chao, sent across hostile territory, were mostly common people. Not soldiers, not nobles, not chosen heroes. Just people given an impossible task because someone had to carry it. That's not a small storytelling choice, it's a philosophical one. It says something is worth examining about heroism. That has nothing to do with power fantasy and everything to do with duty, family, and the quiet refusal to give up when giving up would be completely understandable. This connects to something we don't talk about enough in game design conversations, the cultural assumptions baked into what we consider a compelling protagonist. Western AAA storytelling has leaned hard into exceptionalism for decades, but a story built around an ordinary courier and his son, rooted in an actual historical sacrifice that most of the world has never heard of, is a genuinely different entry point into what a AAA action adventure game can be about. Chapter 5, What this means for the next 5 years. So where does this go from here? Chinese developers have increasingly focused on the localization of themes and content, with games like Wuthering Waves heavily centered around Chinese culture, and Black Myth Wukong demonstrating that this approach can boost results that generally compete with names like Elden Ring and Sekiro on the global stage. In the wake of Wukong's release, numerous Chinese companies offered significant investment towards promising AAA projects, and notably, many studios had enough leverage to decline those offers, suggesting developers now have considerably more choice and control over their own projects than they did before. That last detail matters more than it might seem. Creative leverage is what allows studios to take risks like Blood Message's Unsung Hero, instead of defaulting to whatever formula testing best in a focus group. I think what we are watching right now is the early stage something that's going to fundamentally reshape what AAA gaming culture represents over the next 5 to 10 years. Not a replacement of Western Japanese AAA storytelling. There's no reason this has to be zero sum, but a genuine expansion of whose history, whose mythology, and whose definition of heroism gets the full blockbuster treatment. And for the most of gaming history, players from outside the traditional AAA triangle had to translate themselves into someone else's story to access the biggest, most polished experiences the medium had to offer. But that's starting to reverse. Conclusion. So what is Blood Message really? On the surface, it's an upcoming third-person action-adventure game about a messenger crossing 1,000 miles of desert in 848 AD. But underneath that, it's a data point in something much bigger. It's proof that the technical and creative infrastructure required to make a true AAA blockbuster is no longer locked behind a handful of studios in a handful of countries. It's evidence that audiences worldwide will embrace stories rooted in specific, unfamiliar culture history when those stories are told with genuine conviction and craft. And it's a continuation of the door Black Myth Wukong kicked open 2 years ago. We don't know yet if Blood Message will be great. It doesn't even have a release date yet. The trailers look genuinely promising, but trailers always do. But what we do know is that its existence, a single player blockbuster built around the obscure history of Tang Dynasty, centering an ordinary career instead of a chosen hero, funded with real conviction by one of China's largest game companies, would have been almost unthinkable a decade ago. And that shift is worth paying attention to, not because it's trending, but because it's permanent. But what do you think? Are you excited for stories like this entering the AAA space? And what culture or history do you wish a studio would take this seriously next? Tell me in the comments down below. I'm Silver, this is Silver's Edge, and if you like watching videos like this, then don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Until next time, stay as Silver.